Hello. Um, Speaking on kombucha and the various things that it can be converted into, it's kind of awesome to be real. Like different people make candy, jerky, as well as clothing and linen can be made out of kombucha SCOBY. And the varying other degrees of helpful byproducts that are created by the process. Acetic acid. As soon as you take acetic acid, it can flush out all the mucus in your immediate nasal cavity, as well as your throat area. So, that utilized with certain herbs would be magnificent for healing certain conditions, or there's actually a bunch of different herbs that go along with this, but we're talking about kombucha. So just to be exact about like what this is, it is a creative interpretation of the process of actual kombucha creation, and it's an ode both to the future and what people may continue doing with all of the bio products that are coming out nowadays, as well as a introduction into a drink that you may not have actually ever heard about before. If you would like to know more about kombucha specifically, just wait to the end of the presentation and there will be credits for different things that you may be wanting to get interested in or involved in, and I appreciate the show. So Marissa's world is a concept made into a story, both to be more digestible in terms of the processes that happens when a kombucha does its alchemical magic, but also a way to connect with people that otherwise wouldn't know or even have access to this type of information. How is that even possible? Well, there are a lot of things within the realm of kombucha creation which seem at odds with each other, but truly it happens in such a way that has been documented. This much and so many other things can be said for items that are fermented, that aside from kombucha, that happen spontaneously. For example, how does something that is an alcoholic fermentation become something that is mostly acetic acid and almost alcohol free? How does something that was in the process of rotting become something that becomes unrottable? And what does that unrottable principle mean when things in this very realm die all of the time? Aside from the things that the SCOBY can be made into, just the liquid itself being a healthful liquid, just the liquid itself being something that can suspend and continue life even without the same needs that human beings need to survive every day. One example of that is oxygen. So without further ado, the story of Marissa's world. It began with the world in the woes of destruction. Invaders from above coming between the world of the symbiotic life that had existed for an era. The mother handed the child away in order to preserve their life. Once handed away to one of the trusted officials, Marissa was whisked away by the wind on a smaller version of their giant gelatinous saucer which they inhabited, which was their world, now beginning to change in color. Its function was slowing. Constituents were not producing as it usually would the symptoms life that usually happened inside of that environment. inside of their universe. Disagreements had led to an opening where normally invaders could not survive. The SCOBY family was finished. This special child grew up, tasked and searching for her space, where she can find an ecosystem that feels like a place where she can be. She was taken away, which to her young eyes appeared to be great expanses of darkness, great expanses of light, which even in these various stages, she still had enough life juice left in her in order to maintain her structure. As time passed, the supplies had started to run out. Little by little, each one of the people given the command to watch this young princess, they fell along the way due to the lack of occurrences in a certain order. All of these, the bacteria, and other multifaceted and renowned parts of kombucha society, each fell away because they were not in alignment. So, as Marissa continued on, she found herself in an environment that was almost consistently full of light. She did not feel like she was activated by this circumstance, but by the very least, she was able to get a bearing of what direction to go. Something told her to look for low ground. Something told her to look for a darker area so that she could sleep and rest, rejuvenate, not knowing what happens after that. A garden would have been a preferable place for this young SCOBY to settle, as something in her told herself that she was full of great nourishment, which would take care of the plants and the flowers within that garden. Because of her specific makeup, she didn't feel that was quite where she should be. She had a conversation with the flower and asked, "Do you know where I should be? Don't you see my petals? Don't you see that I'm full of juice and purpose? Move on from here." With great shock and sadness at the first encounter of negativity, SCOBY moved along, slowly but surely picking up dirt from that encounter. Before long, Marissa came across a four-legged animal. It was a squirrel. And with sadness and a little bit of fear, Marissa asked if she was meant to be of service to the squirrel. And the squirrel replied, "Even though you do seem supple, I don't sustain myself off of you. My recommendation is that you find somewhere up high. That's usually where I find great things. That's where I find my food. That's where I have my babies. That's where I find my purpose, is high up in the trees." Marissa had never been in a tree before, so didn't quite know how to identify. But she thanked the four-legged animal and knew that the direction was up. As the miniature SCOBY traveled up, she slowly became more exposed to the sunlight and dry air further away from the Earth's surface. As she began to climb, she became more weary, more thirsty, drying out more and becoming more discouraged that there wasn't a place for her. All of the ones who had been given the instruction to guide her were gone. She followed the instructions of these strangers, some of them rude, some of them kind, and yet still she did not know what her purpose was, and she did not know how full her life would be. After an eternity of traveling the direction of upward, the notion that she was about to expire naturally happened. She gave up on the upward climb and soon pursued moisture. Eventually and thankfully finding a place within a cavern that happened to be full of moisture. Marissa engulfed herself within this fluid. She instantly felt relief. She didn't want to move. She didn't know where to go. All she knew was that this substance that she resided in was making everything feel just a little bit better. Hours passed, and her pieces began to unfurl. She began to feel the warmth from the sun was no longer an enemy, but began to add to her own fruitfulness. She began to bask in this liquid. As she basked in this liquid, she began to feel herself growing, to feel herself multiplying in ways. Eventually, the sun went away and it became night, and even more still, through this nighttime, she felt even more at home. She felt her creativity within herself begin to blossom. She felt like the words from that flower were not so hurtful anymore. She felt grateful to the squirrel about the advice that it had been given to her. Now, upwards may not have meant the same thing. Maybe upwards means inwards. As she moved inward, she began to feel pieces of herself come to life. She began to bubble in different areas, and filling with these memories began to spawn in the very substances which had joined her in the beginning of her journey. During this process, and much to her disdain, she realized that the sun would come out again. And as the light continued to move across the sky, so added a new feature, which happened to be two human beings. One human being walked up to the substance, looked at Marissa, and shrieked in disgust, saying, "Look at this nastiness in this jar. How long did you have this drink out here?" The other human walked up and said, "Oh, it's been a few days," looking at it more thoughtfully, and said, "But I know exactly what to do with this." So now, inside of what she knew as a jar, Marissa and all of her buds were very helpless to move anywhere, very shocked by both the words and the size of these new captors, or so she thought. The second human being moved Marissa into another jar, covered it so that she was covered in night, and placed her somewhere dark. After this, something miraculous happened. Soon Marissa was joined by others who reminded her of her buds as well as her memories. This made her feel less alone, and she started a conversation. So she asked the yeast, What is such a handsome fellow like you doing here? The yeast responded, I usually travel here and there, even in the air. I'm here now, and you are one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen. Followed by the introduction of a bacteria. This bacteria also found Marissa quite beautiful. So, as to not upset the brotherly balance, both of them decided that they would have a wager as to who was more productive in the environment should be the one to take the hand. As you can imagine, both of these substances in kombucha, if you know anything about it, are integral for it to become what we consume every day. These two new gentlemen were introduced into the playing field. They naturally began showcasing their best assets. So, yeast explained that he could turn the molecules around them into a substance called alcohol, which would entertain her further. He did this in such a way where all of the vicinity would change into the very substance, and everyone was drinking of it and exclaimed of how wonderful of a gift this was, and that in this realm of the dark, it would be nice to have something like this. Everyone was amused, especially bacteria. Bacteria observed the incomes and outcomes. He tasted it, and with a few breaths, breathed out a whole new part of the equation called acetic acid. He presented this to everyone, stating that even though it didn't give the same exact feeling, it would have the side effect of giving everyone and everything that partook of it a long, healthy life. Animals, humans, and plants alike. So clearly, because of this, Marissa was now torn between these two gentlemen, though maybe not quite torn, because they inevitably became inextricable to each other, and everyone found a way to coexist with each other. The partnership generated many generations that came from this initial SCOBY enjoyed the alcohol, and many generations learned to convert acetic acid. What seemed like eons later was the time when the humans came back to this jar that they set together, and upon discovering the new substance which was now in the jar, the first human became happy and was willing to partake in what before she had seen to be ugly. It was now many times more giant than the size that it started as. It was many times more pure than what it started as. And now it was there, something dirty from outside, inside of a jar. It's now there to provide nutrients, balance, and microbes to her own system with amazing health benefits. The second human then took the jar out into his garden, where he had a multitude of plants and animals, including his dogs, squirrels, raccoons, etc. He opened the jar and scooped some of the liquid, pouring it into the dirt to acidify and add nutrients to the very flowers which had insulted Marissa previously. He then took pieces of her SCOBY and threw them to his dogs so that they could eat it. Previously, she had thought that she had no nutritional value towards the animals. Last but not least, he poured 2 cups, one for the first human and one for himself, in order to partake of the beautiful elixir of life, or champagne of life, bubbly, all types of names that are named after this one drink that we know of as kombucha. So as you can see here, I have a few pieces of SCOBY laid out. It's funny because it looks like chicken. It is edible and it's relatively easy to slice. As you can see, the color for my specific biome is a little bit different than how some people have or projected, but even if it was a little bit darker or stringier, it would still be just as viable. As a matter of fact, any one of these single pieces has the potential to become a giant piece of SCOBY. That's the beautiful thing about utilizing this beautiful piece of biology, is that it never stops reproducing as long as it has the appropriate environment to reproduce itself. That's all the more reason why it is the perfect example of a sustainable food, but also a sustainable resource for any of the various things that you can use this puppy for. Some of the things that I use it for are additions to my compost pile. Both for adjustment and nourishment, and I'm currently working on turning these into candies. To be true, this will be the first time me tasting this absolutely raw, so I mean, it tastes just like kombucha, so can't really complain. The actual texture, I mean, it's kind of amazing because this is literally the outcome of bacteria and yeasts that have reproduced and produced in such a way where it produced strings and to attach itself to each other, like and it consumes. This is like a little universe right here. I'm just casually munching on a little universe. It's amazing. I've also been communicating and reaching out to a congresswoman in LA, as well as some other opportunities to be able to provide free kombucha and to the homeless, especially people that are in need or more in need of adjustment to their ecosystem. So that's it for now. As you can see, I'm preparing to make a larger platform based off of my kombucha and the processes that I've already come to. If you would like to help support that, please pay attention to the information I place at the end of this presentation about crowdfunding and or donations that you can help, to help us move forward faster in reaching the world in my specific brand, which is called KOHmbucha. We are, as is with every kombucha brand, we have our own individual strains of bacterias, but then also we all have different things that makes us unique. Mine is raw, and the different herbals that we utilize within our kombucha brand. Aside from that, keep your eyes open. I'll also provide information at the end if you would like to pre-order for our release that we have coming up. We have multiple releases coming up, both in kombucha world but also in the sustainable world, as my involvement with slow fashion or sustainable fashion is definitely on its way with a few months outlook. So follow me on my links and stay tuned with the stuff that I've got going on, because I am actually particularly passionate about helping the world and increasing information that people have access to in order to do so. Thank you. Thank you.